What if I told you that the deadly cold was not an enemy to the indigenous people of the plains, but the only building material available to them? Imagine a situation where the temperature drops to minus 40 degrees. A snowstorm is raging around you, and you have no tent, no house, not even a cave. Most modern people would die within hours of hypothermia and panic in such conditions. However, for the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, it was just another winter night that had to be survived with minimal losses. Their ability to survive in conditions incompatible with life was based on knowledge passed down from generation to generation. They did not fight nature, trying to subjugate it, but used its harsh laws for their own salvation. Watch the video to the end to find out how the Indians used the snow itself to keep from freezing to death, and what unusual technique allowed them to stay warm without building a large fire. Are you ready to learn the truth about how an empty plain was turned into an impregnable fortress? When the horizon disappeared in a white haze and the wind knocked them off their feet, the first and most important thing to do was to create a windbreak. Stopping in an open field during a blizzard meant certain death due to rapid heat loss. Warriors understood perfectly well that wind blows heat out of clothing much faster than low temperatures alone. Therefore, their first task was to find a place where the terrain offered at least some shelter from the gusts. If there were no natural shelters, they began to build them themselves from whatever was at hand. Snow on the Great Plains is often dense, compressed by constant winds almost to the state of stone. The Indians used this property by cutting out large blocks or simply raking the snow into high ridges. They formed a semicircular wall, the open part of which faced away from the wind. This shape created a low-pressure zone where the air was relatively calm. The wall had to be high enough to completely hide a person sitting or lying down. It was hard physical work, which in itself helped to keep warm in the first few minutes of the stop. The physics of this process is quite simple, although in those days it was explained differently. The snow wall forced the wind to bend around the shelter from above, creating an air pocket behind it. Inside this pocket, the temperature could be several degrees higher than outside due to the absence of wind cooling. In addition, falling snow began to accumulate behind the wall, further insulating the improvised dwelling. Snow, as we know, is an excellent heat insulator due to the air it contains. Thus, the elements themselves began to work to protect people, creating a barrier from the aggressive external environment. It was important to correctly calculate the size of such a shelter for a group of people. Too much space was difficult to warm with body heat and breath. Too cramped a shelter restricted movement and led to poor circulation, which was dangerous. Usually the wall was built so that the group could fit tightly, shoulder to shoulder. This allowed them to create a collective microclimate that lasted all night. A lone traveler had much less chance of survival than a coordinated group. Sometimes, if the snow was not deep enough to build walls, shrubs were used. Branches were woven together with snow to form a reinforced structure capable of withstanding the force of the wind. Any materials at hand were used: dry grass, saddles, bundles of belongings. All of this was laid at the base of the wall to give it stability and density. The main task was to create a windproof barrier at any cost. Every gap in such a wall could become a channel for icy air, sucking out life. Interestingly, such methods of protection from the wind were practiced not only on the plains, but also in subarctic regions. The Athabascans and Cree, who lived further north, perfected the art of building snow shelters. However, on the plains, where there was not always a lot of snow, it was necessary to be more inventive. Sometimes it was necessary to literally dig into the frozen ground to create at least some semblance of a parapet. Knives, tomahawks, and even flat bison bones were used as tools. Special attention was paid to protecting horses, which were the main wealth of the nomads. The animals were placed so that the snow wall and people protected them from the direct wind. The horses, in turn, served as an additional source of heat for the people huddled against them. This proximity was mutually beneficial and often saved the lives of both rider and horse. Losing horses in the winter steppe was tantamount to the destruction of the entire detachment. Therefore, caring for the animals was as much a priority as protecting the people. These temporary shelters existed only as long as the storm lasted. As soon as the wind subsided, the tribe or detachment left their place of rest, leaving the snow walls to melt. Archaeologists find almost no traces of such camps, as they completely disappeared in the spring. It was architecture of the moment, created for one specific purpose: to survive the night. No unnecessary decorations or amenities, just pure survival functionality. Some travelers who observed this way of life were amazed at the speed with which the shelters were erected. A well-coordinated group of warriors could erect a windbreak wall in 15 to 20 minutes. Everyone knew their place and their task, and no unnecessary words were spoken. In extreme cold, any delay cost precious energy. This skill had been honed over centuries of living in one of the harshest climates on the continent. Could you build a shelter with your bare hands in a blizzard in 20 minutes? Tell us in the comments what survival skill you think is most useful in our modern winters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the survival of ancient peoples. Guess where it's warmest in an open field when the air temperature drops below a critical level? The answer may seem strange, but salvation was often sought not on the surface, but below ground level. Indigenous peoples knew very well that the earth freezes more slowly than the air cools. Even a shallow pit or natural depression could become a life-saving niche. Ravines, dry stream beds, and sinkholes from uprooted trees became ready-made shelters. In such places, the wind did not blow as strongly, and the temperature was more stable. If there was no suitable ravine nearby, the warriors began digging snow trenches. These were not full-fledged dugouts, which would have taken days to build. They were long, narrow depressions in the snow that reached down to the ground. The snow was thrown onto the edges of the trench, increasing the height of the walls and creating additional protection. The bottom of the trench was lined with branches, grass, or skins to insulate the body from the cold ground. It was important not to lie directly on the snow or frozen ground. A special microclimate was created inside such a trench to retain heat. Cold air, being heavier than warm air, naturally sank down, but the absence of wind compensated for this disadvantage. The trench could be covered with bison skin cloaks, secured with spears or branches. The result was a kind of low tunnel in which one could only lie down. The snow that fell on the skins created an additional layer of insulation. The principle of such a shelter resembled an animal's den covered with snow. The heat emanating from people's bodies rose upward, reflected off the roof, and returned back down. In the small space of the trench, the air warmed up quickly even without a fire. The main task was to ensure minimal ventilation so as not to suffocate. To do this, small holes were left, which were regularly cleaned with a stick from the inside. Experienced hunters knew how to choose places where the snow formed natural hollows. Under such snowdrifts, voids often formed near bushes or rocks. It was much easier and faster to expand such a void than to dig a new hole from scratch. The Indians knew how to read the relief of the snow cover, determining what was hidden beneath it. This skill allowed them to find shelter where an unprepared person saw only a white field. Sometimes they used so-called wolf pits, small round depressions for one or two people. In such a cramped burrow, people sat with their backs pressed against each other and their knees pulled up to their chests. The fetal position allowed them to retain as much heat from their internal organs as possible. They threw all their warm clothes on top of them, creating a cocoon. In this position, it was possible to wait out even the harshest night, although there was no question of comfortable sleep. The earth and snow burrows also concealed the detachment's presence from enemies. In the steppe, where visibility could be kilometers, secrecy was a matter of life and death. A snow trench covered with fresh snow was completely invisible from a distance of a few steps. This allowed scouts to approach enemy camps or escape pursuit. Survival and war were closely intertwined in the culture of the Plains tribes. However, this method had its own significant drawbacks and risks. The main danger was that clothing would get wet from melting snow under the influence of body heat. Wet clothing instantly lost its insulating properties in the cold and became an icy shell. Therefore, warriors carefully monitored the temperature inside the shelter, preventing overheating. The balance between warmth and dryness was critical for survival. Another threat was the possibility that the shelter would be buried under too thick a layer of snow. Getting out from under a snowdrift several meters high after a heavy snowstorm was no easy task. Therefore, those on duty, if any were assigned, had to periodically shake off the snow or check the exit. In single shelters, people had to rely on their own biological clocks. Waking up in time to dig themselves out was as important as falling asleep. Why do you think modern survival techniques still recommend this ancient method of burying oneself in the snow? The answer to this question lies in the immutable laws of physics. In the next chapter, we will examine how nomads' clothing was transformed into a personal shelter. What if I showed you a technology that surpasses modern synthetic insulation? The secret to the survival of the Native Americans lay not only in their shelters, but also in the unique properties of bison hides. A buffalo cape, or robe, was not just a piece of fur, but a high-tech product of that era. Winter buffalo hides had thick, dense undercoats and long, stiff guard hairs. This combination created an air layer that excellently retained body heat. The process of tanning such a skin was long and laborious, taking the women of the tribe many days. The flesh side of the skin was treated with a mixture of the animal's liver and brain, then kneaded for a long time. As a result, the skin became soft and elastic, like fabric, but at the same time did not let the wind through. A properly tanned skin did not stiffen in the cold and allowed free movement. This was critically important, as restricted movement impaired blood circulation. In snowstorms, the Indians used the skins in a special way, turning them inside out. The smooth leather side was on the outside and served as a windbreak from which snow easily rolled off. The fur lying close to the body or clothing created an insulating layer of air. If the skin was worn with the fur on the outside, snow would get stuck in the wool, melt, and wet the clothes. This simple rule, wool to the body, saved thousands of lives in the icy deserts. One large bison skin could cover a person completely, creating a closed cocoon. The Indians would squat down, tucking the edges of the skin under themselves to prevent air from blowing in from below. Inside this cocoon, the warmth of their breath mixed with their body heat, quickly raising the temperature. The person was effectively in a personal tent that they carried on their shoulders. Even in the most severe frost, the temperature inside such a cocoon remained above freezing. Two skins were often used for sleeping. One was spread on the ground or branches, and the other was used as a cover. The lower skin insulated against the cold of the ground, which was more dangerous than the cold air. The upper skin served as a heavy, thick blanket that was not blown away by the wind. The weight of the skin was an advantage in this case, as it pressed tightly against the body. The two layers of fur created a thermos effect. Interestingly, the wool on the animal's head and tail was often left on the skins. This had not only ritual, but also practical significance when using the skin. The tail could serve as an additional fastener or wind direction indicator. The head of the skin was used as a hood to protect the back of the head and neck. Every detail of the natural material found its use in everyday life. Caring for such skins on a hike required special attention and discipline. In the morning, it was necessary to beat the frost that had formed from breathing off the skin. If this was not done, the frost would melt in the evening and wet the fur, rendering it useless. Drying the skins by the fire was dangerous, as the leather could become brittle. Therefore, mechanical cleaning with snow and beating were the main methods of care. The value of a good winter skin was so high that it served as currency. A high-quality robe could be exchanged for a horse or a weapon. It was a necessity, without which going out into the winter step was suicidal. Losing a skin during a blizzard practically guaranteed death. Therefore, warriors took care of their capes no less than their bows or rifles. The waterproofness of the skins was also increased by smoking them over a smoky fire. The smoke penetrated the pores of the skin and preserved it, making it less susceptible to moisture. Such a skin had a specific smell, but it did not get wet under wet snow. This method of processing was known to many peoples, but it was perfected on the plains. Leather processing technologies were the pinnacle of applied chemistry in the Stone Age. Like this, if you are also amazed at how people found such effective solutions without modern laboratories, your support helps us tell more about the forgotten technologies of the past. Want to know a secret that changes everything we know about personal space for the sake of survival? In extreme cold, the concept of individualism took a back seat to collectivism. Group sleeping was not just a tradition, but a strictly necessary technical survival technique. A single human body, no matter how hardened, has a limited heat generation capacity. A group of people, on the other hand, is a powerful heat accumulator capable of withstanding the cold. The technique of group sleep was perfected over many years and had its own clear rules. People lay close together, literally intertwining their limbs to reduce the area of heat transfer. The most vulnerable were placed in the center of the group: children, the elderly, or those who were weak. The strongest and most enduring warriors lay at the edges. They took the brunt of the cold, protecting the core of the group with their bodies. There was a rotation system that allowed everyone to get their share of warmth. Those who were freezing on the edge could swap places with those who were warm in the center. This required a high level of discipline and mutual respect within the group or family. No one pulled the blanket over themselves in the literal sense of the word. The survival of one depended on the survival of all, and selfishness in such conditions was deadly. The common pile was covered with all available skins, creating a single large covering. Under this multi-layered blanket, the temperature could be 20 to 30 degrees higher than outside. People warmed each other with their breath, and the air inside became humid and warm. Sleeping in such cramped conditions was uncomfortable, but it was better than freezing alone. The psychological feeling of togetherness also helped to combat the fear of the elements. An important point was the position of the sleeping people's heads. They usually lay with their feet toward the center or their heads in one direction, depending on the shelter. This avoided chaos and ensured that everyone had access to fresh air. Faces were often covered with the edge of clothing or fur to warm the air they breathed. Heat loss through the head and neck is enormous, so protecting them was a priority. Even during sleep, the group remained alert on an instinctive level. If someone began to shiver violently, a sign of severe hypothermia, their neighbors would wake up. They would actively rub and warm the freezing person with their bodies. Group sleep was an active process of mutual assistance, not just rest. Every member of the group was responsible for the life of their neighbor. Some tribes had special large sewn skins for such cases. These were the prototypes of modern multi-person sleeping bags. They could accommodate an entire family, which significantly increased the efficiency of heat conservation. Such products were heavy and could only be transported on horses or in sleds. On foot, they had to make do with individual capes sewn together. Interestingly, a similar practice existed among soldiers during winter campaigns in different eras. However, for the Indians, it was part of a culture devoid of embarrassment or prejudice. Physical contact was perceived as a natural way of exchanging vital energy. This strengthened social ties within the tribe and increased trust. Waking up in the morning, the group had to leave the sleeping place quickly and in an organized manner. It was impossible to linger, as without movement, the body began to cool down quickly. The sharp transition from the warmth of the kuchmala to the icy morning was a severe test of willpower. But it was precisely this ability to mobilize in any conditions that made them survivors. How long could modern humans endure such cramped conditions and discomfort for the sake of warmth? The answer to this basic question lies in our psychology, which has changed significantly since then. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans use fire without building large bonfires. Contrary to popular belief, you cannot build a large fire in a snow cave or behind a windbreak. An intense flame would quickly melt the snow walls, turning the shelter into a wet trap. In addition, a large fire required a lot of fuel, which is extremely difficult to find in the snowy steppe. Therefore, the art of the small fire was valued more highly than the ability to create a huge flame. Native Americans knew how to keep a fire burning with just a handful of dry grass and twigs. The main fuel on the treeless plains was dried bison dung, known as chips. It burned slowly, gave off even heat, and most importantly, produced almost no smoke. The absence of acrid smoke was critically important in a cramped, poorly ventilated shelter. Smoke could sting the eyes and cause coughing, giving away their position and preventing rest. Warriors often carried supplies of dry fuel with them in waterproof bags. The fire was lit in a small pit, often lined with stones if they could be found. The stones heated up and continued to give off heat even after the fire went out. It was the simplest heat accumulator, working all night long. Sometimes the heated stones were wrapped in leather and placed at the feet or pressed against the stomach. Such a stone mustard plaster helped to warm the blood circulating through the body. The technique of lighting a fire in a blizzard required virtuoso skill and preparation. Tinder was always carried close to the body to keep it dry and warm. Sparks were struck with flint and steel, covering the tinder with clothing to protect it from wind and snow. Losing the ability to make fire meant being left without hot food and water. Therefore, the flint was a sacred object for every man in the tribe. The main purpose of fire in such conditions was not so much to warm the air as to melt snow. Drinking cold water or eating snow was strictly forbidden, as it sharply lowered the body temperature. Water was heated in leather water bags by throwing hot stones into them, or in metal pots if available. A warm drink was the best way to restore internal heat and energy. The fire was maintained by a special person on duty who made sure that the flames did not burn too brightly. It was a responsible task. Falling asleep and letting the fire go out, or conversely, flare up, was not allowed. Fuel economy was paramount. Every splinter counted. Often the fire was no bigger than a tea saucer. The light from such a small fire also had important psychological significance. A small flame in the pitch darkness and howling storm gave hope and a sense of home. Life in the small detachment, lost in the endless steppe, centered around it. It was the center of their temporary world, their point of support. Sometimes, when there was no fuel at all, they used animal fat. A piece of fat with a wick made of moss or twisted fabric burned for a long time and gave off a little heat. Such improvised candles were an emergency source of light and heat. The smell of burnt fat was unpleasant, but in an extreme situation, there was no choice. The ability to handle fire also included carefully covering up traces in the morning. The ashes were scattered or buried, and the site of the fire was covered with snow. The Indians tried to leave nature in the same condition as it was before their arrival. This was dictated both by respect for the spirits of the place and by the military necessity of secrecy. In wet weather, they used the inner bark or dry moss found under the snow to start a fire. Knowing where to find dry fuel after 2 days of blizzard distinguished an experienced warrior from a novice. This knowledge was a survival map etched in their memory. What if I told you that the best stove is inside your own stomach? Native Americans intuitively understood the biochemistry of thermoregulation. To generate heat, the body must burn calories. In cold conditions, energy requirements increase significantly, and normal food cannot meet them. Therefore, the winter diet of the indigenous peoples of the plains was radically different from their summer diet and focused on fats. Fat is the most energy-dense fuel for the human biological machine. The main energy bar of the past was pemmican. It is a mixture of dried and powdered bison meat, mixed with a large amount of melted fat and sometimes sour berries. Pemmican could be stored for years, did not spoil, and was incredibly high in calories. A small piece of this product provided a feeling of fullness and a boost of energy for several hours. In a blizzard, when hunting was impossible, pemmican became the only source of life. The consumption of pure fat was also common practice during the winter months. Bison bone marrow was considered a delicacy and an excellent warming agent. It was eaten raw or slightly warmed, providing a concentrated dose of nutrients. This helped the body maintain a high metabolic rate and generate heat from within. Modern nutritionists would call this an extreme keto diet. The diet also changed in cold weather. It was necessary to eat often, but in small portions. This maintained a constant digestive process, which itself generates heat. Heavy meals could cause drowsiness, which was dangerous, and hunger led to rapid freezing. The Indians knew how to listen to their bodies and replenish their fuel in time. Hot broth was another way to warm up quickly. If they managed to build a fire and had prey, they cooked a thick broth from meat and bones. The liquid carried heat throughout the body, warming the limbs from the inside. Animal blood was also used for food, as it is rich in salts and minerals. An important rule was not to consume alcohol, even if it was available through trade. The Indians quickly noticed that firewater gave a false sense of warmth, but in fact contributed to rapid cooling. The blood vessels dilate, the heat escapes, and the person freezes much faster. A clear mind and body were essential for survival in a blizzard. Preparing food for the winter was the main task of the entire tribe during the warm season. Women dried tons of meat and harvested fat and berries, understanding that the life of the community depended on it. Hunger in winter was worse than the cold, as an exhausted person could not resist the frost. Pemmican supplies were stored in special leather bags called parfleche. The ability to endure hunger if supplies ran out was also part of a warrior's training. In such cases, they chewed the bark of certain trees or leather to trick their stomachs. But this was a last resort, which they tried not to resort to. Resource planning was the basis of their survival strategy. Water was obtained from snow or ice, but it was never eaten in solid form. The energy expended by the body to melt snow in the mouth was too high a price to pay. Snow was melted in any container or even in a flask under clothing, using body heat. Dehydration in winter crept up unnoticed, but was just as dangerous as in the desert. Could you survive for several months on nothing but dried meat and fat? This question about basic needs shows how dependent we are on the comforts of the modern food industry. In the next chapter, we will discuss how grass and shoes replaced modern thermal socks. Feet were the most vulnerable part of the body during winter treks through deep snow. Frostbite on the toes meant loss of mobility, which was a death sentence for a nomad. Native American footwear, moccasins, was perfectly suited to these conditions, even though it looked simple. They were made of soft tanned bison or deer leather, which was breathable but retained heat. The main secret was that moccasins were not tight. The inside of the shoes was filled with dry grass, moss, or bison wool. This layer worked like modern thin-solate insulation, creating air pockets around the foot. The grass absorbed excess moisture perfectly, keeping the feet dry, which was critically important. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with new grass, as there was plenty of it in the steppe. It was a replaceable, disposable, and environmentally friendly insole. In winter, moccasins with high tops reaching to the knee were often worn. They protected the shins from snow and wind, acting as gaiters. The lacing allowed the shoes to be tightly fastened so that snow would not get inside when walking through snowdrifts. The leather for winter moccasins was smoked especially carefully so that it would not get wet. Fur leggings were worn over regular pants or leggings. They were attached to the belt and covered the legs from the hip to the ankle, leaving the groin and buttocks covered by a loincloth and shirt tails. This clothing design may seem strange, but it was very functional. It did not restrict movement when riding or running, unlike heavy European trousers. In severe frosts, moccasins with fur inside, turned inside out with the pile facing the foot, were used. These were similar to modern boots, providing maximum protection. However, the fur inside was more difficult to dry, so such moccasins required careful maintenance. Warriors often carried a spare pair of shoes with them to change into when their feet got wet. Changing shoes in the cold was a risky procedure that had to be done very quickly. To protect their hands, they used mittens made of animal skin, often tied together with a string around the neck, like children's mittens. This prevented the loss of mittens, a tragedy that could cost them their fingers. The mittens were made large so that the fingers could be clenched into a fist inside to keep warm. The separate thumb on the mitten was often made with a slit for shooting a bow or rifle. The head was protected by fur hats made from fox, wolf, or otter skins. Often, a hood from a bison cape was used, but a hat provided better protection for the ears. The ears were rubbed with grease to prevent frostbite on exposed skin. The face was sometimes covered with a soft leather scarf or a piece of cloth, if available. All clothing was layered, which allowed for heat exchange regulation. If it became hot during active movement, the top layer was removed to prevent sweating. Sweat was the main enemy. In the cold, wet clothes froze instantly. The layering system allowed moisture to be wicked away from the body and dry warmth to be retained. Indians paid great attention to decorating their clothes even in harsh conditions. Embroidery with porcupine quills or beads was not only pleasing to the eye, but also strengthened the seams. The spiritual component was important. The patterns served as talismans, protecting the owner from the evil spirits of the cold. Clothing was not just a utilitarian item, but an extension of the warrior's soul. Thus, every element of the wardrobe was thought out to the smallest detail and tested by centuries of experience. No unnecessary details, only what worked to preserve life. Nature provided the materials, and human ingenuity turned them into ideal protection. Surviving a snowstorm without shelter required not only physical endurance, but also an iron will. The main enemy of a person in such a situation was panic and the desire to do something. Instinct urged them to run, seek refuge, move to keep warm. But in conditions of zero visibility and gusty winds, any movement was a waste of precious energy. The Indians mastered the art of active immobility. They knew how to enter a kind of trance, slowing their breathing and heartbeat. Sitting for hours curled up under a skin while the wind howled overhead was not a task for the faint of heart. It required complete control over one's thoughts and fears. They understood that the storm could not last forever and that they simply had to wait it out, conserving their strength. Patience was a warrior's main weapon in the battle against the elements. In this state, they tried not to fall into a deep sleep so as not to miss the dangerous symptoms of freezing. It was a borderline state between sleep and wakefulness that allowed them to control their bodies. They periodically tensed and relaxed their muscles, circulating blood without changing their posture. Such isometric exercises kept them warm without compromising the airtightness of their shelter. Group support played a huge role in maintaining morale. Elders or experienced warriors told stories, sang quiet songs, or simply talked to distract people from the cold. The sound of a human voice in the darkness of a snowy grave reminded you that you were not alone. This helped to avoid feelings of hopelessness and despair. Panic led to irrational actions. People began to climb out of their shelters, lost their bearings, and died just 2 steps away from rescue. The culture of upbringing taught restraint and self-control from childhood. Crying or complaining was considered not only shameful but also dangerous. Tears froze on the face, causing frostbite. Stoicism was the norm of life. The wait could last a day or more until the storm subsided. During this time, it was essential not to dwell on negative thoughts. Visualizing warmth, sunshine, and hot food helped to trick the mind and body. These were a kind of meditative practice developed through natural selection. They also knew how to listen to nature, determining changes in the weather by the sound of the wind. The slightest lull or change in wind direction told them that the storm was coming to an end. This gave them hope and allowed them to plan their next steps. Their connection with the outside world was not interrupted even under the snow. The endurance of the Indians amazed European observers, who often described them as insensitive to the cold. In fact, they felt the cold just like everyone else, but they knew how to endure it and not panic. It was a victory of spirit over matter, of will over instinct. Psychological training began in early childhood through rituals and trials. Pouring cold water on oneself, sleeping on hard surfaces, fasting, all of this tempered the character. At critical moments, these skills kicked in automatically, saving lives. Ultimately, those who knew how to wait survived, not fighting the storm, but becoming part of the landscape, allowing the elements to pass by. It was a philosophy of harmony, not confrontation. If the situation allowed and there were thick bushes near the campsite, the Indians preferred to build more complex and reliable shelters. In such cases, they erected temporary wigwams using willow as a base. Willow was considered a unique building material for the plains, as it was flexible, surprisingly strong, and easily accessible along riverbanks. Even in severe frost, its wood retained its elasticity and did not break when bent, which was critical for construction. This structure was incredibly resistant to gusts of wind precisely because of its low and streamlined shape. The wind simply flowed around the dome without encountering stiff resistance, as is the case with flat tent walls. The frame was tightly covered with whatever was at hand: spare bison hides, large pieces of bark, or conifer branches if the camp was in the forest. This created a primary protective layer that kept the heat inside and prevented the wind from blowing it out. Such a dwelling was incomparably more comfortable and safer than a simple hole dug hastily in a snowdrift. In a dome shelter, it was possible to sit freely, completely straightened up, which was important for resting the back after a journey. Here, it was possible to hang up and dry wet clothes by the fire, which was impossible in a cramped snow cave. It was no longer just a place to sleep, but a small temporary home. Sometimes, to save time and energy, the tops of nearby bushes were simply tied together without even cutting them down to the root. This formed a natural shelter that already had a root system holding it firmly in the ground. This method of construction was even faster, taking only a few minutes, but required the presence of suitable dense vegetation. It was the perfect solution for an emergency overnight stay when there was no time left for cutting. The time of forced downtime was used wisely. Worn-out equipment was repaired, Clothes were mended and hot meals were prepared. Women could mend moccasins, while men checked their weapons before hunting. These shelters became true islands of safety and stability in the raging ocean of winter chaos. It was the ability to create comfort in the midst of a storm that distinguished an experienced plains dweller. The Willow Dome structure was the direct prototype of the famous sweat lodge, called an inipa, which was used for sacred purification rituals. The principles of construction were surprisingly similar, creating a hemisphere out of flexible rods covered with skins to retain heat. This suggests that the sacred architecture of the Indians grew out of everyday survival practices. The spiritual and material aspects of their culture were inextricably linked. In the harshest steppe, there was an unspoken but sacred law: never destroy anything that could save another person's life. The abandoned frame was a kind of sign that someone had been here and managed to survive, passing on the baton of hope to the next generation. Travelers could only renew the covering, but the foundation was already there, saving precious calories and time. It was a system of mutual support that worked without words or agreements. For the Indians, the flexibility of the willow symbolized the flexibility of the people themselves, living in harmony with the harsh nature. It was the ability to bend under the blows of a squall, but not to break, straightening up again when the storm subsided. The ability to adapt to circumstances rather than fight them head-on was the basis of their philosophy of survival. Nature taught them resilience through its plants. The use of exclusively local materials made nomads completely independent of external supplies and trade routes. Everything necessary for life and building a home was literally around them, under their feet, or within arm's reach. All that was needed was knowledge and the ability to take it from nature with respect and gratitude. This gave a sense of freedom and confidence in the future. In wooded areas, for example, among the Cree or Iroquois tribes, such shelters were built slightly differently, using forest resources. There, thicker poles and large pieces of elm or birch bark were used, which were stronger and more durable. Such structures could stand for years and be used as seasonal hunting lodges. The forest provided more substantial materials than the open steppe, but the principle of a quick-to-build dome remained the same across the continent. From the forests of the east to the prairies of the west, it was truly a universal architecture of survival, proven by thousands of years of migration in a wide variety of climatic zones. The hemispherical shape proved its effectiveness in deep snow and heavy rain. It was a standard that any tribe could understand. The ability to quickly create a warm home from literally nothing was one of the main and essential skills of any warrior and hunter. Boys were taught this from childhood, turning the construction of a shelter into a game that would later save their lives. Without this skill, long winter journeys and military campaigns would have been physically impossible. A person was only mobile as long as they could secure a safe place to sleep anywhere. When the wind died down and the ringing silence of a frosty morning set in, the most crucial stage began: leaving the shelter. The first thing to do was to dig themselves out, as the snow could completely block the exit overnight. This was done carefully so as not to collapse the roof. The bright sun reflected off the snow was blinding, so the Indians used homemade glasses made of leather or wood with narrow slits. Snow blindness was a real threat. Immediately after waking up, they checked each other for frostbite. White spots on the skin were rubbed with snow or fat to restore blood circulation. It was important to notice damage as early as possible. Then they began an active warm-up to warm up their stiff muscles and joints. Breakfast was hearty and hot if they managed to build a fire. They needed to replenish the calories burned during the night before the long journey. The horses were dug out and fed aspen or cottonwood bark if grass was unavailable. Taking care of the transport was a priority. The camp was packed up in a flash. The skins were beaten free of ice, belongings were packed, and traces of the camp were swept away. The detachment once again became a mobile unit, ready to move. Speed was important in order to make up for lost time. The plain after the storm was unrecognizable. Familiar landmarks disappeared under snowdrifts. Navigation required tremendous experience and intuition. Trackers looked for signs that would help them find their way home or to a hunting spot. Often after a storm, the strongest frost would set in under clear skies. The air was so cold that breath froze in midair. On such days, it was necessary to keep moving, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Surviving the night brought people together and gave them confidence in their abilities. It was another victory over death, which was later recounted in stories around the campfire. Survival was not seen as a feat, but as part of a man's daily work. Their ability to recover after extreme exertion was phenomenal. Within an hour, the detachment could be fighting or pursuing an animal as if the night in the snowdrifts had never happened. The bodies and spirits of these people were forged from steel and wind. They left behind a silent white desert as they continued on their eternal journey. Nature tested their strength, and they passed the test every time. Life went on, no matter what. Thus, one story of survival ended and another began. The cycle of life in the wild was cruel but fair. We have seen that the survival of Native American tribes in blizzards was not a miracle, but the result of a deep understanding of the laws of nature and physics. Snow walls, earthen burrows, the proper use of skins, and group warmth are all elements of a complex system of adaptation. They did not have 21st century technology, but they possessed the wisdom of centuries, which allowed them to feel at home where others saw only death. Their experience teaches us that humans are capable of enduring much more than they think if they remain calm and act together. What other secrets of the indigenous peoples of America would you like to learn about? Perhaps you are interested in their medicine, methods of hunting bison, or raising children? Write your suggestions in the comments, and the most interesting topics will form the basis for future videos. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.